Hello, all, and welcome. In this podcast series, we're going to be looking at onboarding. Now, in this podcast series, we will be exploring onboarding through three distinct lenses: the organization, the job, and the culture. To kick off the series, we'll start with why onboarding is important to the organization, as we hear from Susan Minaya, COO and Chief Learning Strategist of Minaya Learning Global Solutions. Stay tuned to learn more. Hello, Susan, and welcome back to the show.
Hi, Dario. Thanks for having me.
So this time around, we're focusing on onboarding, specifically the organization side. So why is onboarding so important?
Well, you know what they say, Dario, good talent is hard to find and even harder to keep. 20% of staff turnover occurs within the first 45 days of employment. And that's staggering because if you look at the cost to hire, you extrapolate the cost investment of getting people on board and hiring them and getting them in the room, and all of that bleeds out the door. 20% of what you're doing, that's almost a quarter of the people that you hire. And that's significant. So onboarding plays a really critical role in a company's strategy to retain talent, whether they're a large company or a small company, because we work with both. And I think a lot of times people think of the onboarding process as something large organizations do, but even small companies should have that kind of a mindset about onboarding their talent. So many organizations really are good at starting off strong. Day one, you have the typical company onboarding, and they usually do a pretty good job of that. But what happens is that they tend to finish poorly, like the first 90 days, which is related to job and culture onboarding. So I think this is a really important fact. It's sort of like we start strong and we finish poorly. And, the fact is the most successful organizations really look at the first year of employment for an employee as their onboarding experience. And it includes onboarding to the organization, to the job, and to the culture. So there's a lot packed in there and a lot for someone to get ramped up in the first 12 months of being on the job. But once you get them to stay for the first year, the likelihood they'll stay on with you, it grows exponentially. So while employees may only need 90 days to feel comfortable and competent in their job and their ability to navigate the organization, the balance of time is where assimilating into the culture is really the long game that organizations need to focus on. So there are many people who have left a company in their very first year, loving the work but hating the culture. So this is where the inclusion and diversity strategies of an organization play a really big role to ensure that employees feel a sense of belonging. So consider that organizational orientation really is best done in doses, right? Rather than drinking from a fire hose like a lot of people tend to do. Rather than share everything, share only the essential things, just what's essential. The brain can only absorb so much, and the goal is to keep energy high. Organizational onboarding is an ongoing process, and as an employee moves through the first year on the job, organizational orientation is really the beginning of that journey on their very first day.
Yeah, wow. I really like what you said about, not being a fire hose, taking everything kind of in doses, and it seems a lot more, like, as you said, digestible. For new employees going through that onboarding process and slowly being introduced to the culture and the job. Okay, well, let's talk about what's essential for organizational orientation then.
Well, first of all, recognize that the new employee really needs validation, that they made the right decision to join the company. And this is essential. And actually, the burden of that validation is on the corporation, right? The company that hires them. So imagine, people come into the role, everybody wants to be successful, everybody wants to come into the role and do a great job, but they're also on the fence, right? Did I make the right decision? I had a lot of choices. I had many jobs I could choose from. I chose this one. I hope I chose the right one, right? So they still come into orientation with a little bit of nag in the back of their mind. And really the job of that first day when they come in for their corporate orientation is to really get them to seal the deal with them that, yes, in fact, you did make the right decision. And, I think that when they go home at the end of their first day, I always believe that they should feel pumped, like really thinking like, man, I'm so glad I took this job. I love what the organization does. And I really believe in what they're doing. And I feel prepared that my most basic informational needs have been met, and wanting to tell their friends and family about all this new adventure that they have coming forward for them in this new role.
Yeah. Be the reason they make that excited phone call at the end of the day.
Exactly. Like you've had a new job, right? Have you?
Yeah, I've made the call where it's like, I got it. I'm in it. I love it. The company's been so great. I'm excited to see what happens next.
Yeah,
Yeah, I've had that experience before.
Yeah, and you know what they say, you only have one chance to make a first impression, right? And so that's how organizations really have to see that first day of onboarding, because it's just critical and you really have to get the hook with them. And that's an emotional hook.
Well, how is it best to structure the orientation?
Well, I guess when I think of orientation within an organization, taking the long view of a year, kind of imagine a funnel, right? So at the top of the funnel, here's where you're going to provide the context in the grand scheme of things. So this would be the organizational orientation that you're doing. So, here you're trying to convey to them the company's vision and their mission. Like, what are the key components of the organization? How are we structured at more a broad view, if you look at it, not so granular, but kind of understand what are all the piece parts of the organization and how do they work together to achieve the vision and the mission? And it's really important for people to understand that. And then understanding too, here's my role. Where do I fit in the grand scheme of the things that I'm going to be doing for you? And how does the work I do as an employee in that role help achieve the core tenets of the organization, help you achieve your mission, your vision, right? So I think most job seekers today, in my experience, are really, really good at doing their homework before they join an organization or even apply for a job, because for them, it's really important that the job aligns with their way of thinking and what they think is a good and valid company to work for. But this is critical information that they have to reinforce. Number one, as you brought up earlier, making what the recruiting people and what the marketing people for the organization, when they went out trying to seek them, then when they come into day one of orientation for the company, it's congruent with what they were told before they actually accepted the job. And I think this really reinforced trust with the employee.
All right, let's move down the funnel a bit then.
Yeah. So next, I think is really about the organizational values. So this is really critical. And here's where we get the stickiness factor that I like to talk about, because
your favorite phrase.
Yeah, I love it because, you got to have stickiness there. Otherwise, people are sort of like fluid and they're easy fall through your fingers, right? So here we should be sharing the values of the organization and really leveraging examples so that they can begin to understand what's important to the organization from both a cultural, a social, and also a customer perspective. So that they kind of say, how am I expected to show up each day and treat others, right? Because when I come join this organization, I kind of want to know the rules of the game. How do we act when we're here? And working with many organizations really over the last 30 years, I can tell you that may seem like it's basic, but it really isn't, right? A value like customers first really can mean so many different things. And it really depends on the industry. It depends on the company's size. There's a lot packed in there, and you have to help the employee understand what that means to your organization. And so, also people who care about social and global accountability and incorporating that into your orientation so that they kind of understand how that helps link maybe their personal values, right? With those of the organization. And you really get a strong connection when those two things jive together. So I think creating that stronger connection to the work and you get higher levels of employee engagement that way. And then finally, I think the transition is important. So as we go from one phase to another, we're talking today about the organizational onboarding, but we also have to kind of set the table, as I like to say, for the next phase of onboarding, which will be the job, right? And so I think clarifying the values for an organization really sets the stage for the conversation that this new employee is going to be having with their manager for job orientation. And it's also the springboard into the conversation about performance expectations on the job.
These are some deep topics.
Yeah.
How long does an organization typically take for orientation, and what are some ways you recommend for conveying this in a timely manner?
Well, I think there's kind of no hard and fast rule here because some organizations take a full day for a company orientation and others take 2 hours. I think it just really depends on the organization's style. Its size, how many people are they putting through the door every day, so I think that has a lot to do with it. And there are many impactful ways of communicating the mission, the vision, and the values that can help expedite that without someone just being a talking head in front of the room. And I think my favorite is actually videos of employees within the company welcoming new employees, sharing perspectives and experiences that speak to these, basically the core tenets that they were just, told in the orientation. And it really gives them a sense of identity to see that and hear stories from other employees and that they can see themselves in their shoes, Another consideration is who's delivering the orientation session. So the leaders as teacher model is excellent for employee engagement on the first day because they see leaders of the organization taking the time out of their day to come and welcome them to the organization. It's huge. It's huge, huge, huge for the engagement factor. But it's not always feasible because, executives are busy. But you'd be surprised how many corporate executives really do lead these sessions in some form or fashion for their organization. And actually, they love doing it. Oftentimes with the clients I work with, if their leaders are doing these things, that's one of the highlights of the role that they do. They love onboarding new people. But it does take a lot of internal coordination when you do that. And it takes a lot of attention to detail so that the new employee experience is assured. Because if someone can't make it or they're always swapping out because they can't show up, there's a lot of level of effort in the background to make sure that that gets done well and seamlessly.
Is there anything else essential for the organizational onboarding?
Well, from the orientation perspective, yes, just some grounding on organizational resources. So, we talked about the mission, we talked about the vision, but then, the opportunity at that first day is really kind of highlighting what's the company intranet, Here's our new employee information about benefits or the employee locator, where we go get our acronyms and glossary news. You don't want to overdo this because it could just be like overwhelming for people, but this is information they care about. When they're a new employee, they want to know how they sign up for their benefits. They want to know how to speak the language of the corporation, and they don't want to always have to be asking people what acronyms mean. They'd like to be able to kind of show up and know some of that stuff.
Yeah, have that printed out, please.
Making sure that everyone's basic needs are met about next steps. So where do I go from here? Are the instructions clear? Am I done for the day after this? Do I go meet my manager or supervisor for lunch? Where do I park? And, also talking about essential policies and procedures, but, depending on the organization, this may be better done at the job level. And really the next level of detail will come from the job orientation, which we'll talk about in our next session. But, Dario, in closing, I would just like to say that this first day of organizational orientation should be mission critical for organizations relative to employee validation, employee engagement, and employee retention. Because done well, it sets them on a path that's very positive to the job orientation.
Wow. Well, thank you, Susan, for sharing why onboarding is important to the organization. Next episode, we will focus on the importance of onboarding to the job. Until next time.